Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Brian Muys from American Public University System, and thank you all for coming out this afternoon as part of this terrific program here at PSO and the Whitmore House. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce three of my APUS colleagues and one colleague of a colleague, if you will. And in my right to left order here, we have Danny Welsch, who's our interim dean for the School of STEM. We have Jim Brinson, who is assistant professor, School of STEM. We have Tim Boileau from University of West Florida, and our Ken Williams, last but not least, who is director for the APUS Center for Cyber Security, if I have that correct. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Danny, do you want to start things off, or Jim, please?
Yeah. Okay, hi, my name is Jim. Thanks for coming again. So this session, we've got some slides we're going to kind of just move through, but at any point, if you want to take it a different direction, you got a question or whatever, we can go that route as well. Okay, so this is just our little starting place here, but so I used to teach chemistry on ground at a brick and mortar institution, and I've also walked by a lot of chemistry labs in my life. And as you go and you walk by and you look in the door, you see something over and over that I didn't really think a whole lot about until the last couple of years, honestly. But I would see a student with something on their lab bench right here with one finger on a book and like looking like this, right? And trying to essentially follow a recipe to perform this experiment. They weren't necessarily talking with each other, at least anything meaningfully. They were basically had one goal, one objective, and that was to get in and out within the allotted time and to not miss any points on this assignment. That was it. Especially when you're dealing with 100 level and especially non-majors types classes. They're failing to miss all these connections that are happening right before their eyes. So, unfortunately, though, this is still happening. This type of cookbook approach to STEM education, it happens in high schools, it happens in college, the college university setting. But I think back and what drew me to science. I know I sort of landed in it, but I've always had an interest in it. And what drew me to that was not the excitement of the possibility of a lifetime of following a list of instructions. That was not what it was for me. It was quite the opposite. It was the fact that there are questions to which there are no answers, that I certainly didn't have answered, that I could figure out an answer to, but also some of the smartest minds out there were questions that they didn't have answers to. And I found that very interesting. And what I realized too is there are some analogies to cooking. I mean, obviously we're mixing things together in a chemistry lab, albeit for different purposes. Don't lick the spoon, for example. But and it's also messy. Like science can get messy, right? By the time it's all done, and sometimes the results are surprising. Whenever I cook, it's messy, and the results are always surprising. So there are some similarities, but in terms of what science is in STEM education, so I'm not limiting to just your natural sciences here. This is true from what I've learned from talking with people and overall in STEM education, is that we're missing something. We're cranking out products, so to speak. We're cranking out individuals and students and learners who are critically lacking some very important things within STEM education. So what we're going to try to talk about a little bit with this panel as we move through is what some of these gaps are. And then now what I have learned from working in the institution in which I work, but also just my research experiences, my experiences teaching in general in higher ed, what have I learned about virtual learning spaces that can help out with some of these gaps that are certainly that are currently being made manifest within STEM education. So this is not just about online education. This is not just about using for example, virtual labs in place of other labs. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. That's a component of what this discussion is. But alternative and virtual learning spaces, these guys are going to talk about a couple different examples of how we are using that, certainly in terms of instructional labs. Tim's going to talk about something a little bit different in terms of just the educational space in general and how to bring a little bit different light on that. One of the gaps that I see, and this is, again, we can all speak anecdotally to this, and also research shows this, is we are getting students consistently now that have large gaps in conceptual understanding of this material. You can blame it on standardized tests if you want at the high school level. You can blame it on poor instruction at the next level. I'm not sure, but one thing is for sure, when it comes to concepts being taught, especially in a laboratory setting within STEM education, students just don't possess the content knowledge that they need to possess. So, and I kind of fall back to that cookbook lab approach for a lot of that. The students end up focusing on ends over means due to grades and time, like I mentioned before. And this is true whether or not they are on campus, because I've actually taught in a place before that. Now, some of our classes at APUS, we actually use lab kits, especially for our science majors classes. So that is an alternative laboratory learning space, but it's not a virtual learning space, right? It's an actual physical hands-on learning space, but definitely not within a lab with other people with all that instrumentation and all that kind of thing. So there's still a component of that, but what you're also going to find is, and what I've seen happen, because I've actually been around places who use the kits to supply their actual campus labs. So I've watched people interact with these kits before, not just my remote students who live far away. They also realize that once you start mixing something together, you're on a time clock. So they're bound by the same things that your campus students are in terms of time is a commodity. They're bound by that, and they're trying to focus too. And most of them are just trying to get a good grade as well. Let's be honest, at that introductory level. So they're not grasping the importance of specific steps that they are performing, specific techniques that they're supposed to be using. Thanks. And some of the observations that are being made. They're just recording it and moving on. Where am I at? They're not making the deeper conceptual connections between the steps that they are performing. Thanks. And there's a big case of follow the leader going on whenever you have lab groups. And I mentioned this before in my last talk. A lot of times you go to campus and you get in a lab group, people do that. I would like to think that most instructors do that for a constructivist approach to pedagogy, but really it's about resources, right? Minimizing the use of the tools and resources that you have to not spend so much money. But what will end up happening is someone will run the show, the other person's kind of just standing there recording all the data. They're not getting anything out of this experience other than a good grade thanks to their lab partner. And then they have data, they'll take that data home, and when they try to analyze it, they don't have any idea what this data means. They're just not making any sense of the results. They're missing connections between the skills being learned and their field of study if these are non-majors. So obviously this is kind of a big encompassing gap here, but it all has to do with conceptual understanding of what it is they are doing. So from a virtual learning space perspective, how can we use a virtual environment to address some of these issues? Well, one of the things that's gaining momentum, of course, is not everyone is a proponent of virtual labs as standalone labs for whatever reason, and depending on what it is they're teaching. But what you're gaining more and more acceptance for is supplemental, like pre-lab, post-lab exercises in a virtual learning space. What this will do is studies are showing now, I just read one 2 days ago, about how when students are coming into the lab, to a face-to-face lab, by engaging virtually in a pre-lab assignment before they get in there, they have more confidence in what they're doing. They have more confidence that they're not going to waste time. They have more confidence that they're not going to break anything, and then they're going to do the things that they need to do, and that sort of thing. And this is also a great way, virtual learning spaces are a great way to really provide that in-depth explanation between steps that you just don't have time to do in a laboratory setting. So I'm thinking in my head, for example, even if you just do a virtual version of your experiment before you go into the lab, build in some formative assessments with that pre-lab. You could do that, and then as you're pouring this into this, boom, it pops up and says, "Now, why are you doing this?" Ask them some questions. You let that be a formative assessment towards the end of this and this experiment. And then as feedback in that, you can provide what the explanation is for that step, why it's important. And then the students can access that on their own time. They don't have to burn that precious lab time. I've actually seen, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but I've seen at one institution where they took a 3-hour lab block typically, and just said, we're changing that to 2 hours because we don't have enough space anymore and things. So you're going to have to figure out how to do 3 hours in 2 hours. Thank you very much. So this is something to consider as we go into that because we don't have that time to waste. So. Providing virtual manipulatives for understanding the technique that you're doing. Why are you doing it? The virtual space is great for that. Break down learning barriers, reduce anxiety, and help with anticipating problems. As someone who's taught on-campus labs for a long time, it's inevitable. Everyone breaks something all the time, and that starts to add up depending on what it is. And there's problems that you can anticipate. We would all assume and love the idea if our students would just read the lab before they came to class. But that's not what happens. We all know that, right? They open it for the first time when they walk in that classroom, unfortunately. Whereas if you could engage them in a more interactive way with this material in a virtual space, then not only can we do formative, preparation for the exercise, but also they could have some practice about some things that they realize what they forgot to do in that virtual exercise, or some problems that they had, something that they missed, something they're going to have to remember. Oh yeah, I can't forget to do this when I go in there. That sort of thing. Virtual learning spaces are excellent, an excellent possibility for solution to these types of problems. And all of this will contribute to students being able to actually maximize that interaction in the lab time with what it is that they are doing, whether it's with the instructor or with the materials. They're able to not get so lost on the superficial type of things, just getting things done, but actually feel confident, feel calm, go in there, and feel like they're putting their lab time to good use and trying to understand what it is and getting something meaningful out of that experience. And I'm going to turn it over to Tim for this one. So.
All right. Let's see what we got for. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different point of view. So here's our problem that we're looking at, and it's protocol enforcement, grading, and level of help given to students in general are often inconsistent between lab section instructors, and with no scalable and repeatable instructional workforce training found to exist. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, let me tell you something about myself very briefly. My discipline is instructional technology, and people say, well, what do you do? And I say, well, I make instructional designers. And they say, well, what does that mean? And so I had to come up with an elevator speech. In my elevator speech, I heard this morning in a session that typically have 4 careers over your lifetime nowadays. I've had 8. And the common thread for me was that I've spent my entire professional life looking at how humans interact with technology to acquire knowledge and do their jobs. So that's kind of the direction that I come at. And in terms of solutions, scalable and reproducible virtual training modules. So let me take a look at this in terms of the problem, or what are we doing right? So what we find is that there's increased emphasis in educational policy related to STEM education. You hear STEM all the time. We've got to focus on STEM. We've got to have coding. We've got to focus on science. We're falling behind. There is also consistent support from the scientific education community for learning interventions that promote science literacy as a good for society in general. However, many educational systems worldwide, and I'm not going to quote stats on here, the U.S. is fairly fall behind, are failing to produce scientifically literate citizens because our focus is on superficial knowledge development only. And some of the reasons for this are, as we pointed out, inconsistency in instructional methods and environments that are coupled with inflexible pedagogical approaches and methods, resulting at best in teaching superficial knowledge. What we're missing here is that we're not promoting integrated knowledge that teaches critical thinking, problem solving, and transfer of knowledge constructs that can be applied in new and novel situations. So when I think about scalable and reproducible training modules, the question is then how can we move toward a scalable, how do we get there is essentially the question. And now for me, again, from my orientation, I tend to think about this a little bit differently. I think that it requires a shift in our teaching and learning philosophy as well as the theoretical framework that we're using. And I'm going to get a little gooey-eyed here, and then I'll hopefully be able to bring it back to you. But what I'm talking about is a shift from an instructionist theoretical perspective, which is essentially a cookbook approach, as Jim mentioned, to learning where the teacher is a sage on the stage. I give you knowledge, you absorb knowledge. That's it. Which doesn't give us the deeper learning that we're really looking for. And instead, to start to look at this more from a constructivist orientation using a learner-centered framework. So I can put this into two contexts. I can talk about a constructivist learning approach from a theoretical perspective, and this goes back to the work of Vygotsky, Piaget, and others. But it's pretty simple. What it looks like is that we begin with a concrete object, concept, or a knowledge construct. Here's a problem. This is something that is known, that's in the physical world. You then take that problem, you think about it, you transform it into thought. You then, as an individual, you start to create new mental models using reflection and other cognitive activities that occur within the learning environment and practice space. You play around with it, you poke it, you turn it inside out, you turn it upside down. And at the end of the day, you're going to create and ascribe new meaning to the concept. You're going to take that and put it into a context that's meaningful to you, that you can begin to work with. So that's the theoretical side, and there's much more to it than that, but I've tried to boil it down to a couple of sound bites here. On the other hand, from a methodological perspective, a constructivist approach can be enabled using alternative learning strategies. And there are three that I think fit particularly well in this context, and those are project-based learning, situated learning, and problem-based learning. And you've heard of these before. In terms of problem-based learning, this is where students are learning by doing, they're applying ideas, they're solving problems, they're engaging in real-world activities. And here's the key. In problem-based learning, our students are engaging in activities that are similar to what professionals do in the discipline, which then takes it out of the lab that Jim was describing, where you've got one finger on the procedure and the other finger on the lab. You're not really learning. All you're doing is completing the steps. That's not what a professional does in the field. So it's a little bit different orientation, and I'm not going to take the time here. I have some prepared notes that I put together, but there are 6 different steps that you can go through in creating problem-based learning environment or project-based learning environments, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. But if you Google it, you'll find everything that you want to know about it. But the point being that the second one, so you've got project-based learning. Second is situated learning. And situated learning, simply stated, is where students learn the disciplinary content by engaging in practice. You learn by doing, and in order to integrate and provide context for the content. And then the third is problem-based learning, which takes an active approach to learning that relies on learner collaboration to solve complex, ill-structured problems or wicked problems. When I think about, I was an engineer by training, and unfortunately I never got, and I took all these advanced math classes. I was great. I pulled out my calculus notebooks for 6 years later, and I had pages and pages, and I said, this is brilliant. I have absolutely no idea what I'm looking at, because it was always conceptual, it was always in the abstract. I never applied any of it. That wasn't the kind, I was an electrical engineer, and I was learning physical concepts to be a mechanical engineer. So it didn't stick, in other words. So if we're gonna teach our students to solve those wicked problems that don't happen in a 30-minute lab, we need a different approach, and problem-based learning gets us there. the key ingredient here is that students collaborate with one another to share current knowledge. They negotiate among alternative ideas or hypotheses, and they search for information to construct possible solutions. So that's my approach, I guess, to this gap in terms of inconsistency, is that let's stop trying to be the sage on the stage. Let's move from an instructionist pedagogy or philosophical approach to teaching and learning to more constructivist approach, where we're there to guide our learners and to facilitate the processes of learning.
So just for the sake of clarity, Tim, what is the role of virtual learning spaces in that? Like what's an example? What can we do using virtual learning spaces to do just what you said?
Well, I cover that more in Gap 6,
Okay.
but let me give you a preview,
Okay.
since you asked.
Teaser.
The idea here, and again, I'm a strong proponent of the learning sciences. And the learning sciences is when we start to look across disciplines to draw best ideas in teaching and learning. And it's really looking at alternative learning spaces. And so it is the idea of virtual labs. It's fail-safe environments. It's simulations. It's using technologies to provide different opportunities to interact with the content. And for me, it isn't so much as virtual labs, but more on an alternative learning spaces, which certainly encompasses that.
And another thing I thought of too is to address some of the instructional variance across these sections, right? Virtual learning spaces could be an excellent way to just help train some of these instructors to teach them how to use rubrics to grade these labs, to design the rubrics as a community that is going to be standard that everyone's going to use across these labs. Give them some examples of some assignments and let them all grade and then work through those with those. That can all be done virtually. You can train your graders. You can train some consistencies across sections so that there's some continuity there to partially address this gap as well.
And the last thing I would say on that, moving off, is just think about. Sometimes it's easier to think about virtual learning space if you think in terms of competency-based learning as opposed to knowledge-based. Before I ever send a pilot up to fly an airplane, she's going to log thousands of hours in a simulator.
Tim did that, by the way. Just he can.
I used to run a flight simulator for the Air Force years ago. But the idea is that it's a lot easier to be able to crash a plane and walk away from it in a simulator than it is to do it in real life. And the other aspect is that you don't have flying an airplane is not really what I would consider to be a fail-safe environment. Generally speaking, you want the number of safe landings to match the number of takeoffs. So I mean, it's funny when you think about it, but that's what virtual learning spaces do. It just provides a safe environment where an instructor can provide oversight, but yet still give the learner the opportunity to experiment and to find alternative solutions.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Something else that is a noticeable gap that I've sort of, as I monitor, and not only the literature, but just around and watch and use my eyeballs, is the fact that students are just coming into the lab and not having any idea where stuff is, what they're doing. It's almost like they've walked into another planet. I mean, it's unfortunate, but students are lost in the lab space. Students are lost in the virtual lab space sometimes, but they're even lost in the physical lab space. Maybe if they look up from their phone as they came in, they would know what's going on, but I don't know. They're lacking just basic knowledge of terminology, nomenclature, basic techniques and methods that you assume that they would know how to do. And this is a big one, and I'm curious about this because, lab safety. As you walk around, and now, granted, part of it is just the fact that some instructors are not enforcing it properly, of course, but it's almost, where were they during the lab safety instruction? Like, you go around and there's so much violation that's going on, and I see it sometimes in, okay, so when I taught Gen Chem at APUS, we had lab kits. Students would be required to either use pictures or videos or something like to document the laboratory experience. And, there were so many times when they would send these pictures without their PPE. They're doing this procedure. They don't have any goggles on. They don't have anything else. I'm like, first of all, you could have looked at this picture before you sent it to me. Why are you not wearing what you need to wear? I have to mark you off now, But anyways, I don't understand. I don't know. But it's on the decline, and a lot of that could be instructor enforcement. But certainly people aren't trained. If you look, what is happening a lot more is you come in the first day of a lab. Typically what you do is you'll go over the syllabus, and then you'll go through lab safety procedures, and someone will read something to you. They'll like fire extinguisher, fire blanket, sinks, and they'll go down the list. And and that's your lab safety training, really. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But also wasted lab time for learning on the spot. Like I said before, lab time is a very valuable time. The most valuable time, I would argue, in anyone's scientific education. So we need to make sure that we're utilizing that to its fullest, and wasting time learning on the spot, like, how do I wash this? Where do I throw this away? Where's this? Where's this? Where's this? These are not things that we should be doing in lab. Or I guess not things that we need to be doing in lab. These are things that we can address in a different environment to give us more time in the lab to make deeper connections of things. So students are contaminating samples, they're breaking equipment, they're wasting materials, and if for no other reason, if it's not an educational reason, this is a financial, budgetary concern, right? We're having to do more and more with less and less all the time. So this is our virtual spaces will give us a way to help solve this problem. It's easy to make a virtual lab tour of something. If you know someone who knows a little bit about technology, you can go in and even use your own lab for this. I'm not talking about it's like something generic. You can go in and you can make a 360 kind of thing with, even make it interactive with your particular lab, showing exactly where your stuff is in that lab. And then you could even have it pop up and have these assessments within that. And you could ask a student a question about that. So like, how do you use a fire blanket? Here's an acid cabinet. What do you do when this happens? How do you clean this up? There's so many rich ways that we could deal with lab safety issues in a virtual environment without having to burn up that lab time in a face-to-face type of thing. So I talked about virtual pre-labs and stuff already, but for learning terms and nomenclature, this is a no-brainer. We shouldn't have to waste lab time, quizzing or teaching anything sort of related like that. That could all be learned in a virtual space. Simple standard operating procedures, how to handle certain types of samples. This is all easily addressed within alternative learning spaces. And this is a big one for me. I really like this. Actually, there's some good options for high fidelity virtual versions of these labs that students could do before they ever come to class. They can understand how they can practice learning techniques before they actually get in there. You wouldn't think it makes a big difference, but in microscopy now, there's some really good high-fidelity virtual microscopy that's out there. I've seen some of this stuff, and some of the stuff that hasn't been released yet I've seen. It's really cool stuff to the point where and some of it's even haptic. So, I mean, like you can feel it. Like if you have a newer iPhone or whatever, you know that you can feel that home button on my iPhone is not really a button, right? It just feels like a button when I touch it. So these are the haptics that I'm talking about. You've got microscope stuff that you can feel. You got clicks that you can feel on different stuff. It's really amazing, some of the stuff that's coming out here. And with a microscope, you learn how to make a slide. You learn how to use your coarse adjustment versus your fine adjustment, to position that, to adjust the diaphragm, all that kind of stuff. And these are really, really excellent exercises. Now, does it completely replace and is good enough than the real thing? Well, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying it's excellent preparation for when you get into the lab to not waste time and to really dive in deeper and get something out of this learning experience before you meet up face to face. And then, of course, safety training. I'll give you an example. Here's just one. This is not incredibly high fidelity type of example, but here's one that I've used before from McGraw-Hill. It's just a lab safety training, but it's interactive. The student at least has to go through it, and the instructor doesn't have to spend an hour teaching about how to wash your hands properly, and how to wear your personal protective equipment, how to dispose of biohazard things. I mean, if you show that to a student, they're going to see it in the lab and know what it is after performing this activity. And you can assess them over that, so you can make sure that they know that. And you can even set the prerequisite they have to score 100 on it before they can participate in lab. Who knows? Lots of things you can do. But a virtual learning space is a great way to address this issue and to make them more literate of safety protocol, safety things like that. And this is true for our people who use our kits too. This is not just a campus issue. We have students who are using live stuff at a distance. This is important for them as well to go through a lab safety training exercise. And now I'm going to turn it over to Danny.
Thanks. How's everybody? Good? 3 o'clock after lunch. Everybody stretch. Stretch, come on. Stretch. Maybe stand up. Turn around a little bit. Okay. So I'm a hydrologist, which basically means that I like to study streams. And all through my scientific background, I had really cool labs where I went and dug holes in the ground, or went and looked at rocks in road cuts, or went and studied streams. And that was one of the reasons that I really liked the stuff that I got to do, because it got me outside. And when I got a faculty position, I taught labs in much the same way that I had experienced labs as a student. So we went to the field all the time, which was great. And then I got a research position, which was also great, but I really missed teaching. And I thought a great way for me to get back to teaching would be to teach for this weird thing that I saw online called American Public University System, which is where I currently work now, and where Jim works, and where Ken works, and a couple of other people in the room as well. But it was online, and the first thing I taught was geology, and I thought, well, how's that going to work? Because I studied geology out looking at rocks in road cuts and going out and standing in the rain and fun stuff like that. And I was a skeptic. I was initially not thinking that it was going to be all that interesting or productive, and obviously I was a little bit surprised because I'm still here. But my initial thinking was, well, this is online. This isn't really impacting a whole lot of people. There's not many people that are really studying this sort of thing online. So, the people that are really interested in it, they can go to a traditional school and take the class like I did. And that was maybe back in 2004, 2005. But things have really changed quite a bit. And what we're looking at here is a graph. Jim presented some of this data this morning. In 2015, the last date that data is available, we have almost 6 million people that are 6 million students taking classes online. Not fully, but almost half of those students are taking classes exclusively online. This is a big proportion of the total college-going population in the country. The other thing that's interesting is when I was definitely an undergrad and even starting out as a faculty member, I thought college was college like I did college, and college like I was teaching college, where everybody goes away and lives in a dorm, and that's not the case at all anymore. So this data and that revelation that college is not what I think of or thought of as college kind of informed me that we need to step it up a little bit. Like, we owe people that can't or don't want to go to a traditional college a decent experience. And the full college experience, the educational side of it, is what we're responsible for as faculty, and providing them a STEM education in the best way possible that fits their goals, that fits their capabilities, is something that we have an obligation to do. So that is something that I find to be pretty exciting. This is similar data. 30% of all students in higher education are now taking at least one online course. You can kind of see that 70% not really doing, 70% of total college goers are not doing anything online. This is the percentage that are attending schools online, and then this 14% of the total college-going population in the United States is going exclusively online, and this is going up really quickly. So we have the issue where it's just the sheer quantity, but also if you look at the distribution of colleges and universities, traditional colleges and universities throughout the country. Each of these little dots is a university, and you can kind of see that they're clustered in the Northeast, and you can't go to Massachusetts without tripping over a couple hundred colleges. But if you're thinking, like, if you live in Wyoming, your choices are pretty limited. So let's say you want to be an electrical engineer and you live in the middle of Wyoming. Unless you have the ability to actually travel and live at a campus or happen to live close to one, your options are really quite limited. So if you think about higher education, there's kind of this thing that our president or our provost refers to as the iron triangle, which is quality, affordability, and access. Well, online education definitely provides access. In a lot of cases, it's cheaper, but the big question has been quality, and I think Jim's work speaks a lot to the quality of online education, at least in STEM from a lab component, and I think that we have a lot of data that sort of speaks to the what we're able to do in an online space. In a lot of cases, well, in all cases is equal to, in a lot of cases can actually exceed the quality of traditional online education. So we've got quality covered, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a second. There's the access issue, and this map kind of helps you understand that, not to mention the fact that we're not showing the entire world here, just our nation. And then we have the cost component too, which we're not really going to touch on much today. So how do we do it? You know, I'm a scientist, so I'm the interim or associate dean of a STEM school. So this is sort of the stuff in my responsibility area. And we teach science basically the same way that you learned science if you went to a traditional university. The goals are the same. We have learning outcomes and learning objectives, and they're really pretty much the same as the learning objectives that you had as you went through a traditional lab in a lab space with all the problems that Jim and Tim are talking about. But we just do it a little bit differently. And one of the ways that we do it is we actually ship students lab kits. This is a chemistry lab kit. This is actually the geology lab kit. This is my personal geology lab kit that I use when I teach geology. We ship this stuff to our students. So they're doing similar things to what they would be doing in the real world. Of course, we can't take them on field trips because they're on submarines or in Antarctica or wherever they happen to be. But we can work to bring the field to the students. There's a lot of really cool technological tools that we can use to help share some of that experience with students in a virtual way. We can also do, I guess, what we would call visualizations. This is the electric pickle experiment. Anybody done the electric pickle experiment where you basically charge the sodium ions in a pickle and you have to do it in the dark and the pickle starts to glow, and if you do it long enough, the pickle bursts into flames and is really exciting. This isn't something we really want our students to do in their kitchen because there's a certain element of danger to it. But we can present them with it's basically a video that has them doing it. This is a video of an air track. Air tracks are really expensive. They're kind of bulky. We're not really going to ship air tracks around to everybody. But we can show the students a video of an air track. They can make measurements directly off the video. Now, of course, there are some limitations here, and this type of thing isn't appropriate for all of our students. But we can go a little bit deeper in terms of cost, expense, technology. We can start to talk about some of the things that Jim was discussing with virtualizations. So in this case, these aren't canned simulations. These are actual virtualizations. You're doing the same things that you would do in a traditional lab. You're just not physically in that space. So in this case, you go over, you pick the plant up off of the bench, you put the heater on the plant, you put the fan on the plant, you plug things in, you make measurements, you get data. You're following all the same steps, but it's just in a virtualized experiment or virtualized situation. And this is similar to what Jim was talking about with his work this morning, where you're actually taking materials, you're taking equipment, you're manipulating things. You can screw things up, you can make explosions, you can cause big problems, but of course you're not bound by things such as safety, space, time, money. So there's a lot more flexibility that we can do with some of these virtualized experiments. The other thing that's interesting about some of these situations is students actually have the ability to follow their own curiosity. Because they're not canned simulations, if a student wants to know what happens when you react calcium carbide in water, they can do that experiment as long as the data is built into the system, which it is. So this was something that I actually did because I was big into caving when I was in college. I asked my chemistry instructor what the reaction was with calcium carbide in water because I didn't really know. I know it produced something that caught on fire, which was cool. And he took me in the lab and we did it. But this is something that students could do on their own with that system. We can also ship out instrumentation to students. The cost of instrumentation is actually coming down dramatically. This is something that we're using in a lot of our general science courses. It's a product by Vernier. It's called a Labquest. It kind of looks like a big iPhone. It's got a lot of the same capabilities, but you can plug sensors into it. They're not research-grade sensors, but they're pretty close. Jim probably has a lot more experience with them than I do because he uses it in some of the courses that he teaches. But it gives students an opportunity to actually collect data with real digital instrumentation and to go through all the steps. There's calibration, they can understand data errors. There's all kind of neat things that they can do with this, and it's pretty reasonably priced and very robust. And then what I like to call data-driven labs. I mentioned I'm a hydrologist, so of course I went and grabbed data from the U.S. Geological Survey, the Potomac River near Little Falls, which isn't that far away from here, looking at discharge in cubic feet per second. This is data just from a couple days ago. There's tons of data out there on the web. When I was teaching face-to-face, this is a lot of the types of labs that we would do. We would get real data that is being collected through these national networks and then analyze that data. We would go into a computer lab and do that. Well, when you're online, it's pretty much the same thing. You're just not physically going into a computer lab. There's so much data out there that's being collected right now that there's just so much opportunity for that. And then there's what I like to call the hybrid solution. So our anatomy and physiology courses. This is actually a kit that's very similar to what our anatomy and physiology courses use. We've got the fetal pig. Yes, we actually ship dead animals to our students, which is exciting to them and their kids, actually, because most of our students have kids.
Some pets like them too.
Yeah. But microscopes are expensive and fragile, so there's a limitation there. So when we go into the histology, then we can jump into a virtualized digital library of histology. So we understand what the limitations are, and then we find creative ways to overcome them to bring as the best experience that we can to our students. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ken Williams, who will talk a little bit about how he handles some of the cybersecurity issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny. And thanks to Tim and Jim for getting me involved with this as well. Interesting discussion on labs because with the focus on cybersecurity today, the discussion would be, well, how do you make an information technology or cybersecurity professional? When I started, I'll date myself, I started in information technology in the late 80s. My curiosity, like Danny, et cetera, wasn't rocks, but it was IT, information technology. Actually, a little while before that, I wanted to take apart radios and touch the registers, and my mom used to be like, we were going out shopping and I see a machine like a register and I want to see how it works. So I had this natural curiosity to kind of be inquisitive about how things work from a mechanical and from a technological perspective. So I became curious about how a computer works, and that was in the late 80s. I wanted to understand how to open a computer and take apart things like capacitor, diodes, resistors, transistors, etc., and dissect it. Because prior to that, of course, again, in my time coming up, we had vacuum tubes. We had the vacuum tubes, and you could see a vacuum tube there, and you could take it apart. You had these huge capacitors. You engineers understand, and capacitors and resistors and diodes, and then those started to shrink, right? Those things started to shrink and found themselves on the way of a motherboard. So I told my brother one time who was in a computer, hey, I want to do a computer. He's like, you really want to do it? Okay, yeah. And then we went to the closest information tech IT fair where we got we have a case, we have a motherboard, we had transistors, memory, and hard drive, and we put it all together. And he said, and so he brought it home, and he said to me, he said, Ken, you want to do this? You want to learn this, right? I said, yeah. It was like, okay, 7 o'clock, let's go, let's do it. And he showed me how to get anti-static philosophy together where I don't burn up the motherboard, and put the memory into the slot. And then he said, okay, now go for it. 7 o'clock next morning was when I finally got that done. Took me the entire night. But the one thing I was talking to my sister earlier this weekend about me, she said, you used to get in trouble a lot because you were always determined to get things done and you would never stop. And Mom was always telling you, Ken, why you want to do this? I'm like, so I understand now that you're always determined to get things done. And I now see where you are with that focus. So all of that to say that I had to go through the physical process of putting the computer together, and learning how to do all of that. And I never could have conceived the day that I will be able to present a virtual environment to students. These are what we present today in a virtual environment, and the leap that I saw from the time when I was a military information IT officer, and I used to carry it around huge assemblage of IT equipment, antennas, satellites. If you would drive in the landscapes today, you'll see the huge tower with a drone antenna on them. We actually used to pack those things up, take them around the U.S., take them overseas, fly them in helicopters, and yes, I used to jump out of airplanes. We even used to try to pack them in such a called form factor, dimensions, because when you go in an aircraft, you have to understand space, dimensions, weight, electricity, etc., and on ships as well. But we used to be determined to be able to provide communications to our Department of Defense forces anywhere in the world. We will drop the thing in, and then we'll get in our parachute and we jump at the aircraft, like why the Air Force individuals would say, well, okay, good luck, because you jumping out of a perfectly good aircraft. We wanted to get down there with our equipment. And then when we get on ground, then we go through the process of setting up the entire thing, and on the ground sometimes. And as we train to understand it, we had to go to this physical classroom. So I never could have imagined a day that I would be able to bring a student into a virtual environment. Well, today, without much graph like Danny has provided there, we have labs. We have a physical lab that you could actually get a motherboard, a computer case, look at a bare case, and then click on the case itself, open the case, and get a motherboard, get a memory, and insert it into the slot. Insert the hard drive into the slot. Configure the memory, configure the hard drive, turn it on, and see how it works, and then connect the power and turn the computer on, and it lights up. And the student gets to get the visual experience of not coming out, not actually getting a physical opportunity to go down like I did and purchase that item. Because my first business that I ran was actually putting computers together. It was called custom computing. Those days when you could walk into the store and you say, I want a computer, and you select your configuration, and my techs put it together. And my techs used to burn up the motherboards. They used to, physically, because you needed an anti-static mat, you needed to be connected to eliminate the factor from getting the discharge from your arm. Today, all the student has to do is click the mouse and go through that experience. Like Tim said, if they burn it up, then they could just rewipe it or restart it with a virtual environment. Teaching, I haven't taught in a physical environment as well. Students would walk in, like Jim said, and without very little experience, they'll come to class and they said, okay. The teacher's going to teach us everything about setting up a computer or setting up a network. And even though they knew that they had the instructions ahead of time, Microsoft does very, very well, and Cisco does very well in giving you the chapters to read, et cetera, step by step how to do that. No, they'll come to class, and they expect the professor to walk them through step by step. And there are some students that are capable of learning dynamically as you're teaching, while some other students, one student told me in high school, the teacher takes us step by step. Well, you're in college, and you're expected to read before you come to the class. You expect to get some knowledge about your labs before you come into the class. In the virtual environment, my students online, they're reading. They're reading before they get that first assignment, and as soon as they get into the lab environment, you can see that they're acting dynamically, or they're prompted. For example, if you have a router, if you connect an internet cable to the router, if it's connected in the wrong orientation, the green light would not turn on. So that's an instant cue to them that they have the current configuration incorrectly. So we are creating cybersecurity individuals that are grounded in information technology concepts just out of these virtual environment. And that has all come to the point where you have certifications, and when they leave, they're getting certified, and to be able to put something on their resume as a calling card, as a credential that, look, I'm versed on networking, and I'm versed on networking security, and configuring a computer, and general security analysis capability. And we also allowing them to take all the other soft disciplines, or such as math and languages, etc., and incorporate it into this virtual environment. And we're bringing a scenario as well to them, because the labs are scenario driven. For example, if you get on your first day of work and you sit on the desk, and your help desk technician, you get a phone call, what do? Oh, my computer doesn't work today. We often have a joke, a running joke in the information technology world that says, if you're a help desk person and you get a phone call, the computer doesn't work, you ask the person, did you plug the power into the wall? So they get to follow those steps by step, and once they get onto the job environment, the work environment, they're able to react to those experiences dynamically, but all in the virtual environment that they're operating in. And things like forensics. Forensics is one of those areas that is a bleed over from law enforcement environment. It is because forensics originally dealing with human crime and human biological remains, et cetera, or a crime scene, is now turned into a digital forensics environment. The students are now taken through experience of investigating a crime scene, for example. What do you do when you come into a room on the scene of a crime where the suspect is done in something like a fraud or a massive breach with a computer? How do you interrogate the suspect? How do you evaluate the room? And one would say, well, what does it have to do with information technology? Well, in every environment today, there's there's a visual camera, security camera in the room. There are some biometric door scanners. There are things like intrusion detection alarm system in place, and all of these are fed into the computer. All of these are fed into the computer or the router for most businesses. So that student now learns how to follow the trail of that crime scene all through a virtual environment, and just awesome training for them to have. So, and then the last thing here is cloud security, because the world is now starting to recognize as a civilized society that we could be mobile and we could harness all the data of the world. I mean, the other curiosity I had was about space. I was always curious about space and philosophy, and students in our days weren't able to access these type of advanced concepts of learning unless they were in privileged environment or privileged learning, such as Ivy League college, etc. Today, they're connected to this world through cloud environment. And because we're recognizing that as a human, we are also putting our data or fusing all of this data or all this data into the cloud. And we are saying, oh, this is a great platform. Let's put our information in there. So when that occurs, then the security analysts now have to think about in an innovative ways how to protect that information, to protect the propriety of the information, et cetera. So the student is getting introduced to that as well, because in the cloud environment, it's designed really for virtual environment. You've got these virtual systems that you could replicate, like a computer, a server, et cetera, and then you kind of create it, you build it up, which is what we call, you create it just out of the environment, sort of a thin space. Thin air, and then you do any kind of configuration you want to do with it. And if there's a virus that is introduced to that environment, all you have to do is just turn it off, and it goes away. And so, similar to a gaming type of environment. So, all of these are innovative, stimulators for students that also supports gaming activities, etc. So, that's what we're doing in cyberspace. Okay.
Thanks. Okay, a question back there.
No, it's at all of you. I'm just curious because he's talking about everything from forensics to all these. Do you all create your own virtual spaces? Because I've never seen anything as detailed as the ones that you've described that have inquiry and built all of the things that you're describing. Do you have your own, or are you using existing platforms out there?
We're mostly using third-party stuff, and that is, yeah.
Well, for example, with late night labs with chemistry, you can do. For example, no, I'm not plugging anything. I'm just saying that was the example that I showed you. That was their platform, highly interactive, high fidelity, to the point where, as Danny said, the key to that is not akin to simulation. Now, there's some back programming that goes behind that. I have to go in and I can, I have to list what chemicals. There's a whole library of chemicals, and the algorithms are there. What happens when this is matched with this, and so there's input that controls. Obviously, the limited input controls whatever output. So you're limited to that, but there's a lot of information that you can put into that system and build that virtual system. So the platform is there, and then you put in what you want. It comes with a lot of examples. You can tweak it, is what I'm saying. I don't have to start from scratch. They give you a library, and then like for the research that I presented this morning, that was a lab where I did it myself. I took a lab that existed that had that had the most of what I wanted from it, took out what I didn't want, put in what I did want, and what ended up happening was it was a sandbox for the student. They literally can take it and mix it all around. Now, for me, I could never be able to just code that system. There's no way that I could just come up with that platform. I don't know what they're doing in cybersecurity. That's a different ballgame because I know you got a whole center you're working on. But for me, that's basically my experience. Sorry, I didn't steal this from you, Danny.
Just quickly to follow on, be open. I mean, there's a whole continuum. I mean, as I'm hearing different, I love what Danny's doing. I've never heard of that before, where you're basically sending lab kits. Is that virtual or is it a remote lab? It doesn't matter. The student is creating the experience for themselves. Ken talks about virtual security labs, and I mean I'm thinking those are different scenarios. What Jim does is very different. The kinds of things that I'm involved in, and it's great. I overheard a comment as we were starting. Danny, I don't know if you're a rock climber or I know that you're a splunker, but I was in Best Buy. And before a few months ago, and I saw somebody with a virtual headset on, and I also saw some Educause, and they had a virtual headset and they had gloves, so haptic experience. They were climbing rocks, and it was so bizarre to watch. But I saw them skydiving. So I mean, there's those types of experiences. I've actually used Google Cardboard rather, $15, and I have elementary school students that are developing their own virtual environments. Or we're using virtual reality to teach marine biology students about how to construct artificial reefs and oyster farms to repair damage after hurricanes. So there's a whole spectrum of experiences that you can bring into this, and they're all discipline related, but at the same time they draw across multiple disciplines to make it work.
There's so much technology built behind most of these that I'm glad that we don't have to develop it, because it frees us up to figure out cool ways to apply it.
Right. Yeah. Before we answer your question, did you have something to say about that?
And for me, the industry has driven. Commerce has driven the platform for my students. There's this massive glut of business benefits that's coming from cybersecurity, and you probably, if you listen to my talk this afternoon, you'll probably glean how enthusiastic this subject is. To me, it's a revolution. It's the now revolution, but industry has gone after these solutions, And it started out a long, long time ago in providing solutions, and now government and academia has come to the fore of saying, well, yes. So what we have is a triad relationship between the industry, in this case of these certifying bodies who've created this environment, academia and government, who's now as recent as December 31st, there are some mandated standards for private agency to become cyber compliance when doing business with the government. And all of a sudden, there's a mad scramble now to get in compliance. And it's like a perfect storm. Everything is now aligned where you've got the resource with this industry that are just pushing it out there, government who's saying make this happen, and for us academia, we just loving it because we are the incubators, we are the platform to teach our students how to use this tool. So yeah, it's all out there, and we're not creating it; it's all created already.
Thanks. I think she had a question for Insa.
I might be a little bit biased because I'm a computer science tutor, and I did notice a lot of the same problems that you guys were mentioning with some of the preparation and the critical thinking. But I'm also a game developer, and I know you mentioned gaming as one of the things, and I'm just wondering. Well, I know with computer science, a lot of times the material's really kind of dry, especially like AP computer science for high school students. It's a hard time getting them to do the reading and do things that they need to do. But it's probably a lot cooler where you can virtually set a pickle on fire or something like that. So in those cases, I think the simulations for some certain types of sciences might be engaging enough on their own. But I was just wondering, do you guys see gaming or gamification as a valuable part of your repertoire, or is that something that's kind of neither here nor there?
No, Dorothy, that is a great question. I would just address it very briefly. My son is in law enforcement and also talking about security. And he's a gamer. He's 30 years old, big-time gamer. Waited in line to get Call of Duty 2 or 4 or 28 or whatever it was that just came out. But it's interesting to note that, this is the Army, the U.S. Army, has a version of Xbox and a version of Call of Duty that they're using to train infantry, because it's a whole lot better to train them in urban warfare in a simulation before they turn them loose. So it's absolutely, and there are other aspects of gamification. There's a competitive effort. There's the self-regulation. There is interim achievements, accomplishments. So you're absolutely on the mark. And computer games are a great way to introduce simulations and to promote learner engagement and the use of technology.
Did you want to address that, or?
Oh, yeah, by all means, absolutely. And as Tim talked about, we started to see the evolution of it as we went into our very last conflict, OIF, Operation Enduring Freedom, because one of the challenge, and again, I'm talking from my military, the DoD experience at that time. We had Air Force assets, Air Force aircraft that were flying into air combat. We had ground-to-air missiles that were flying into the aircraft, and we had soldiers or ground movers going into that same zone. We had a problem, fratricide. And so the Call of Duty type games came about to try to simulate, synchronize, what we call synchronized fires at that very point. How long does it take a missile leaving a launching tube from an aircraft to go to a space? How long would it take for this ground individual to move from point A to point B? What are the exact the dynamics that we're dealing with? How do we synchronize that and then roll it back? So you do everything in full motion. You pause. You roll it back and you move the pieces around the heritage, gaming type. Yeah, exactly. And then you do debriefing, like I said, and you learn. You do what's called a lessons learned environment, and you don't lose anything except for time in the process. And that's the same thing with the technology today. I don't know if Danny, you've got anything to add?
No,
So in your
Untitled Chapter.
Maybe one last question for this gentleman.
Oh yes.
Okay. This better be good, David.
Okay, electric,
Not for me, though. Somebody else.
electric pickle would be a great name for a rock group. That's my question.
There was the electric prunes, I think.
Or fetal pig. I was looking at your kits and I was wondering how the new OER process is affecting that, because for my intro to astronomy course, we had to get rid of a interactive program called Launchpad that was only about $40, and I thought it was a really serious loss. But anyway, how is that affecting? How is OER affecting what you're doing?
So for those that don't know, OER is Open Educational Resources. So it's a push within education to move towards zero or low-cost textbooks and materials for students. And a lot of schools are going in that direction because the cost of texts is skyrocketing, and it's really becoming a challenge for a lot of students. So I think, Dave, your question is basically how do we afford the kits? And the kits are expensive. And when we first started out with the program, we had one plan for how we were going to pay for it, and then that didn't quite work out. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on. We use the kits where they're appropriate. Our general education science courses are primarily a virtualized or digitized experience. So we're actually not shipping kits to all of our general education students. The kits are primarily only going to students who are in the natural sciences degree program, the electrical engineering degree program, the sports and health sciences degree program. So these are students, so it makes it a much smaller number of students that are impacted with this. We made that decision purposefully to stick with a virtualized experience for our general education students, primarily for cost and also just logistics. I mean, we're a pretty big university, and it would be a challenge for some of our suppliers to ship as many kits as we would need, say, for our general biology or introductory biology course, which has several thousand students a month.
I'm just gonna.
Anyone else? I think we're just about out of time.
I'm just going to say this real quickly. We already covered that. What are the benefits for budget, and I'm not going to do all that. That's self-explanatory. And Tim already informed me that in his last comment he addressed gap number 6. Some labs get skipped because they don't fit. You know, when we discussed the gamification was a great example of how some of those things are get addressed so they don't fit in a typical lab. So that's the end of it. So.
Well, thank you to our speakers today, and thanks to all of you for coming out as well. Enjoy the rest of your day.